Today, Israel agreed to a daily 4-hour pause in fighting to allow Palestinians to move to safer territory. The Prime Minister's office stressed that this is not a ceasefire, saying that would only be possible after all hostages are released by Hamas.
Now, this announcement comes as the IDF takes on Hamas militants within northern Gaza, and the United Nations said that Gaza's need for humanitarian aid is colossal right now. They said that aid has increased, but those hospitals remain desperately short on supplies, some of them even reduced now to rubble.
We continue our discussion with Professor Javed Ali from the University of Michigan, who has years of experience with the FBI and Homeland Security. Javed, thanks for being here as always.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me again.
So how major is this announcement by Israel, and how much of a difference will it make? Prior to this pause, is it just airstrikes and bombs raining down all day long? Will this 4-hour window really make a huge difference?
Well, anytime you can get humanitarian aid into a struggling population like the one in the Gaza Strip right now, that's a good thing. But how long that will last, even in these brief 4-hour windows, I think that will also be driven by the conditions on the ground on the military side as well. And a month now into the Israeli military campaign, they've relented to a degree to allow these brief windows for the aid to continue. But if things worsen, that may also close rather quickly. So, but hopefully this will be sustained for some period of time. But Israel is also not letting up on the military side. There, as you mentioned already, I mean, there are the airstrikes, but now we're 2 weeks into the ground campaign as well. And it's hard to know exactly how Israel is achieving its distinct military objectives, but I don't think they're anywhere near towards the end of this campaign either. And Hamas has said very recently in New York Times reporting as of today that they actually wanted to start a state of constant war between Hamas and Israel, and all the humanitarian suffering and the suffering of the civilian population in Gaza Strip to Hamas, it is sort of a secondary issue. So that is a pretty chilling insight into the mindset of the Hamas fighters and how long they are prepared to fight back against Israel.
There have been mounting frustrations from a lot of people. Do you think that there was any pressure for us to hear this kind of announcement now?
Well, the pressure has been building for some period of time early into the Israeli military campaign. But when it was clear that the strikes, first the airstrikes and now the combined ground operations and the airstrikes were causing civilian casualties. It's not that Israel is intentionally trying to generate that many civilian casualties, but because of just the nature of the Gaza Strip, the fact that so many Palestinians were physically in the Gaza Strip when the operation started, and the fact that Hamas has sort of buried part of it, literally buried part of its operational infrastructure into the civilian population in the Gaza Strip too. And for whatever reason, Israel hasn't made a distinction sometimes between a legitimate military target and a target where there are also civilians in the same physical location. And that is what has led to the high number of civilian casualties so far.
So the U.S. has been pushing for Israel to leave Gaza once the objective is met. And we've talked about this a little bit before. What truly is the objective, and how will they know once it's been achieved? We've heard Bibi Netanyahu say multiple times this is going to be a long time coming. So do you see this ending at all in the near future?
I think this will take, even for these near-term objectives, killing or capturing as many senior Hamas officials or leaders as they can, or people 1 or 2 levels below that, destroying the infrastructure of terrorism that has enabled Hamas not only to commit the attacks on October 7th, but decades worth of attacks against Israel, and then the recovery of the hostages. And we're a month into this campaign now, and backing up to one of my earlier points, it's not clear how far along Israel is, at least on the first 2 objectives. And on the third objective, with the release of the hostages, it seems that beyond the 4 that were released a few weeks ago, that there haven't been any additional ones. So until all those objectives are met from the Israeli side, the military campaign will go on for weeks, if not months, possibly longer. And then Prime Minister Netanyahu has also said when that phase is over, that Israel may choose to create a permanent security presence inside the Gaza Strip, in which President Biden, Secretary Blinken, and other senior officials in the U.S. government said that would be a mistake based on the U.S. lessons of military occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan in the post 9/11 era. So it's unclear how even that phase of the fight will or the conflict will unfold. But we're still into the first phase on Israel trying to achieve these three distinct military objectives.
We've seen more American forces being sent over. Any thoughts on our involvement possibly changing?
Well, there's already a significant presence of American military power in the region. We've got the two uh, carrier strike groups, and each carrier possesses a lot of capability, not only with the planes on the carriers, but then the ships that are protecting the carrier as well. There are reportedly at least a couple thousand troops either on the ships that can deploy into the region based on certain contingencies and scenarios. Senior defense officials have also said that there are unmanned U.S. surveillance drones that are being deployed over Gaza right now to help locate hostages. And a senior U.S. Defense official also confirmed that there were a small number of U.S. Special Operations troops on the ground, not in Gaza to engage in fighting, but in Israel to help with the planning and identification of the American hostages. So there already seems to be a significant presence in the region, but how those troops and assets will be used going down the line, that's also unclear. A lot will depend on if Iran gets involved, if Hezbollah gets involved, if this escalation or the violence that's already happened with Iranian-backed proxies in Yemen and Iraq and Syria, they keep firing on U.S. troops that are stationed there. That may also lead to additional escalation. So it's still a very fragile and tense time with respect to the presence of U.S. troops.
Yeah, and speaking of fragile and intense, before we let you go, as we are short on time, Javed, what do you make of the political fallout of this conflict, especially here in the United States? The tension certainly seems to be rising, and this is on a day when we're seeing protests by Muslim residents in the Detroit area encouraging all Muslims to not vote for Biden. And we've seen Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib censured this week. What do you make of all this?
Well, definitely not a political expert, but it seems at first glance that the war overseas is definitely having an effect here domestically and perhaps even locally in Michigan. And this is something that I think the White House is having to take account for. And perhaps that's why the U.S. Position has been evolving over time, where on the one hand, it's still very pro-Israel, but at the same time, it's also trying to recommend to Israel that they have to do more to prevent or minimize civilian casualties, to get more humanitarian aid in, and maybe some of that will prevent the political fallout that's already happened. But we're a year out from the next presidential election. It's unclear how significant that is now, but there definitely seems to be a growing level of discontent and anger, and how that just impacts the election a year from now, it's still not clear.
Yeah, we will see. Well, Javed Ali, we appreciate your time always. Thanks for joining us today.